Michael Moore recently appeared on MSNBC, and he was talking about the current crop of 2020 Democratic Party presidential candidates, and he was saying something that was not only informative, but it was really important for people who typically tune into MSNBC to hear. Because if you watch MSNBC or CNN, and really any mainstream media news outlet, your worldview is going to be shaped based on what they say. You're going to have a skewed perception of political reality. So what he says here is really important and informative. Essentially, he says, the bar for who should be the Democratic Party's nominee shouldn't just be who can defeat Donald Trump. It's got to be someone who actually talks about the issues. So he goes on to explain why this goal of appealing to moderates, it's no longer a feasible political strategy because this just doesn't match up with the reality of where the American people are at. Now, on top of the point that he makes with regard to that issue, he also talks about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and he kind of makes a pitch as to why she should run for president one day. So take a look.
It's too bad that you have to be 35 to be president. That we put that in the Constitution, the Founding Fathers, because people died at 38 or 40 back then. We need to lower that. If that was lowered to 30.
All right, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, is that where you're going with this?
Could be running. She just has to be 30 by the time January of 2021.
So look, everybody can out-progressive each other on their platforms. You're saying that she's got fire in the belly to get
She is the
going?
leader. She is the leader. Everybody knows it. Everybody feels it. She's the leader of this mass movement that is not. I'm not talking about a movement in terms of an organization. I'm talking about a Fox News poll this week where it said 70% of the American public agree with her on having the top marginal rate for the rich, their taxes, 70% rate on the rich. And that's a Fox News poll saying that over 2/3 of the country.
Now, there are a lot of Americans who think that's crazy, but they also don't remember that we had marginal tax rates above 90%.
Yes,
at a time when the economy was actually doing.
I grew up in that time, and that's when all the libraries.
I'm not advocating for it. I'm just saying
the libraries were open. There weren't potholes. Schools were great.
Yeah. Fox likes talking about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Yeah.
I think they talk about her more than anybody else does. The right is enjoying having her as the image of what Democrats are. Is there a danger if someone that progressive runs that it does turn off moderates, or do you think that's not a danger worth worrying about?
I'm not. No. First of all, if you're moderate, stop being moderate. Take a position. All right. There's no middle ground anymore. There's no halfway point to should somebody be paid a living wage. Well, I'm a moderate, so I think they could be paid half of a living wage. If on the issue of choice, there's no halfway there. You're either for it or you're against it. Do you believe in equal rights for women? Do you believe that we should have an equal rights amendment? Yes or no? There's no middle ground. This is no time for moderation.
Where there is middle ground possibly is healthcare and taxes. Right? How much you tax the rich?
How much? 70% of the people said tax the rich.
Or
70%.
Or what kind of health care? Right? There are many different ways of insuring everybody.
Really?
We both agree.
Well, you mean?
I like my system from Canada. It's one of several systems that most of the developed world use. I guess my point is that
all of the developed world. Don't say most.
There's a lot of people.
Don't be moderate and pull your punch here.
Right.
All of the developed world,
except for America,
except for this country. And it's shameful, and we look weird, too. You can't explain it to a person from another country.
No, it's not a progressive policy anywhere else in the world. It's just the policy, right?
It's just the policy. Conservatives in Canada would never think of removing their Canadian health care. The Tories in Britain, all behind it.
Right.
So I found that discussion fascinating. But I will say this. I don't necessarily agree with everything that Michael Moore said, specifically when it comes to AOC, and she actually addressed the prospect of her running for president one day, and she was very clear. She says, how about no? Sometimes political media is too fixated on personalities instead of policies. The whole country just went through an exhausting midterm election. We need a break. Can we instead talk about healthcare, living wage, legalizing cannabis, G&D, and other issues? And as much as I love AOC and as much as I'd love to see a President Ocasio-Cortez one day, I think that what she's saying really is important here because we need to get it through our heads as Americans that politics doesn't just consist of who are we going to elect next? Because we're seeing, these signs at different protests. Oh, well, if Hillary won, I'd just be out to brunch. No, that's the wrong mentality. You can't just elect someone and then wait another 4 years to get activated again. Politics is the ongoing process of struggle. The fight doesn't stop after we have an election. And if you lose an election, you just mobilize to win the next election. That's not what politics is about. Politics is about building coalitions. Politics is about organizing. It's not just about electing people. So I do think that this fixation on personalities, even if it's on progressives, it does kind of get us a little bit, it leads us astray overall. So I do agree with AOC there. Again, I think that if she wants to one day run for president, I would unequivocally support her and would be supportive. But I do think that what she says here is important. But with that being said, everything else that Michael Moore says is really important. So the question really was framed as, can someone that progressive as AOC, actually be president? Because theoretically, she'd turn off moderates. Now, the reason why someone like Ali Velshi might instinctively feel this way is because he lives in that DC elitist bubble. They have this skewed perception of reality where there's, you have the progressive left, the quote far left, you have Donald Trump, the far right, and then in the middle, you have a lot of these centrists who are socially liberal, but fairly economically conservative. They may support, raising the minimum wage, but when it comes to really comprehensive economic reform that would attack wealth inequality, they're not in favor of it. So if you just tune into MSNBC, CNN, you'd get the perception that that's what it's like. There's that 3 classes of American citizens. But in actuality, this is what Michael says to that. If you're moderate, stop being moderate. There's no middle ground. There's no halfway point to should somebody be paid a living wage. There's no middle ground. This is no time for moderation. Now, the reason why he's correct is not just because now is not the time for moderation, but because one, now is not the time for moderation because progressive policy positions, things that you and I support, those are technically the moderate positions. Medicare for All has 70% of support among the electorate, including a majority of Republicans. Other issues like a federal jobs guarantee, legalizing marijuana, a Green New Deal, these are all overwhelmingly popular policy positions. And because they're so popular, as a result, these are moderate positions. If the average American supports progressive policy ideas, then that's the moderate position. So when people refer to Bernie Sanders as a far leftist, for example, well, that's not true because if he was a far leftist, he wouldn't have this broad coalition of support. He wouldn't be the most popular politician in the country because a lot of people, they don't characterize themselves as on the far left. I don't even characterize myself as being on the far left, but that's the perception because mainstream media paints this false view of reality where most people are centrist. Most people don't agree with Bernie Sanders. And look, if you tune into mainstream news, you're going to feel as if there's this widespread centrist consensus, but that's just not the political reality that we're living in. Another reason why Michael Moore is correct when he says that now is not the time for moderates is because if you're a Democrat and you try to go after these mythical moderates, you are going to lose. Hillary Clinton tried this. Claire McCaskill tried this. Joe Donnelly tried this. Heidi Heitkamp tried this time and again, and it hasn't worked. This strategy is now unfeasible because you can't run as a centrist or a moderate at a time when Americans are polarized. You're either firmly in the camp of conservatism or you're on the left. So if you keep trying to go after this voting bloc that no longer exists, that hasn't existed for a while, then you're going to lose elections. And finally, when Democrats started to shift back to the left, when more than half of House Democratic candidates were supporting Medicare for All, what happened? They finally won. We had a blue wave. It's because when you run to the left, you're actually activating a block of voters that exists. That's you appealing to moderates, if we judge someone who's moderate based on where the average American is. Now, Michael Moore says a little bit more about this, and even if he pretty much says what I just told you, he does make another point that's important.
I don't think Americans right now actually really identify themselves in the old school way of, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, you know. I don't think that's what's going on. I think that people have had it. I think that they have realized that they're sick and tired of living from paycheck to paycheck, and this has to end. And they know that their kids are never going to pay off those student
loans. And if we
loans.
didn't see it, we saw it in the shutdown, where you saw government employees, the ones that a whole bunch of Republicans spent years telling me are overpaid, who couldn't make it to their second
another
paycheck.
lie.
So that was a really important point, because I think that what Michael is alluding to here is that, you know, centrism isn't something that's going to work or be exciting to anyone unless they are comfortable. It's why so many of these Hollywood elites love centrist candidates. They love Hillary Clinton, right? Because they're doing fine. In their personal lives, they're living in their mansions, they're judging the peasants from their ivory towers, and they don't have to face what average paycheck to paycheck living Americans face. But what Michael Moore is getting at here is that at a time when people are desperate and they're struggling, they don't want a centrist. They don't want incrementalism. They don't want a gradualist policymaker. They're getting desperate, and as a result, what does desperation breed? It breeds radicalism. People will feel automatically just more inclined to go for the more radical candidate, which means they're going to either gravitate towards a right-wing demagogue like Donald Trump, or they'll opt for the left-wing populist like Bernie Sanders or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, because again, centrism is only appealing to people who are comfortable. So even if it's the case that if you tune in to CNN and you get these anti-Trump Republicans and Hollywood elites on there talking about how we need someone who's moderate, even if that may give us a skewed perception of political reality, the point is that that's not the norm. They're not a representative sample of average American citizens. Average American citizens are on the progressive left just when you look at it from a sheer policy standpoint. So if you try to go after moderates who don't exist at a time when people are polarized and they're either on the far right or the progressive left, then you're not politically astute and you don't know anything about strategy, and you shouldn't be giving your opinion on mainstream media. But yet, we see MSNBC hiring Claire McCaskill, who constantly pushes this idea that Democrats have got to appeal to Republicans. It's harmful, and it's going to lead to losses. So unless people start listening more to Michael Moore and less to the Claire McCaskills of the world and the Joe Donnellys of the world and the Jeff Flakes of the world and the Anna Navarros of the world, then we will be in a bad place politically, where another right-wing demagogue like Donald Trump could spring up and captivate an audience so long as he speaks in relatively populist terms, and that's something that's harmful. So unless we learn the reality of Americans in 2019, then as a country, we're just not going to be able to move forward. And it'd be nice if mainstream media helped with that narrative, brought on more political scientists or people that kind of have their thumb on the pulse of, America, like Michael Moore. At least I don't agree with everything he says all the times, but on this issue, he's correct, and he knows more about the average political voter than the vast majority of people who appear on mainstream news. So, it's why a lot of people have to tune into independent news shows like this one, because we actually are normal people and we don't bring on elites on this channel. We actually talk about what normal Americans are feeling and what they're going through.
Mike is a total loser, so don't hit the subscribe button, okay? And whatever you do, folks, do not hit the notification bell either. Mike treats me so unfairly.